Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
So Barry, a couple episodes ago, we announced this partnership that we're doing starting this year with this really great company, AEP Connections. And I see that we've added quite a few listeners since then. So do you want to give us a little bit of a refresher here, give our listeners a refresher on AEP Connections, who they are, and why we're partnering with them?
Yes, AEP Connections hosts live webinars. I've actually done some work with them, and it's always high-quality topics in neurodiversity. But they're building a library of on-demand courses now. And this summer, they're focusing on providing you with fantastic content at your fingertips. They have courses designed specifically for on-demand with many speakers on many important topics. However, many of their live presentations from this spring are also being made available for on-demand, so you can access them now. If you aren't able to see the courses live, be sure to check them out over the summer. Also, if you need approved provider hours, and it's really important for things such as licensure, they offer many, so be sure to check out the different courses and see the approvals from so many professional agencies.
Absolutely. I know, from Kristen's point of view, I always was hearing about, as an SLP, I need more hours. I need more, professional development. And it's great. It's good to be on top of your craft in that way. So if anybody's looking for some discounts on professional development, AEP Connections, they actually have a few options. So they've got bundled packages, which will, save you money, but also by being a friend of Uniquely Human, the podcast, and AEP Connections, they are extending an additional discount code. So you can save an additional 10% on this offering just by entering the promo code UH10. That's UH10 in your checkout cart. Any topics that we should be aware of, Barry, that you're doing, for instance, that I should be signing up for?
Sure, yeah. And we're talking about Gestalt language processing. We talk about neurodiversity and issues related to that, but there are many other speakers as well. And it's a real cool perk that you get the 10% discount if you put UH10 or UH10 in your checkout cart. Check them out.
Awesome. The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we're so pleased to have as a guest Janeen Herskovitz. Janeen, welcome.
Hi, Barry, Dave. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. Janeen actually contacted me last year and shared a little bit about her story and her practice. So let me give you a little bit more information. about her, and then I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about her in our discussion and what she does. Uh, Janeen is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and the owner of Puzzle Piece Counseling, LLC. She earned her bachelor's degree in special education from Rowan University in New Jersey and her master's in mental health counseling from Webster University. She's been married to her husband, Joe, since 1995, and together they have 2 adult neurodivergent children. Janeen's private practice, Puzzle Piece Counseling, is located in Jackson, Florida, and helps autistic families and neurodivergent individuals live more peaceful lives. We're going to expand upon that a little bit. Her podcast, Autism Blueprint, covers a variety of topics surrounding autism and neurodivergence in the home. So let me begin by asking you about your practice, and let me make it clear that the name of your practice, Puzzle Piece, is Peace. Because as you know, there's some controversy around the other puzzle piece, which we're not going to get into now.
Right.
So why the name Puzzle Piece, Peace?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. I think it's really important. When I opened my private practice in 2011, the puzzle piece symbol at that time was a thing. And as a mom of an autistic child at that time, I wanted to serve the parents in the community. I felt like there wasn't enough help for the family and the parents, and I wanted to create the stuff that I didn't have when my son was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
So my son was diagnosed back in 2001. So I'm one of the kind of, I guess, senior parents. And by senior, Barry, I don't mean age. I mean,
You don't look like senior.
Senior class. So my kids are now 25 and 27. So I've been doing this for a long time. And the PEACE, it was something that just kind of came to me. I didn't want to use that typical symbol, but I wanted parents to know what I was doing and why. And so that kind of that twist on it, I think I liked that a lot better because I never believed that people are missing a piece.
Mm-hmm.
I've believed that we need more peacefulness, in our homes and in our families.
Yes, very well stated. And so we just have our annual parent retreat coming up in a couple of weeks. And that's what a lot of our guest parents, our 60 or so parents who join us for the weekend, talk about. Yeah. And that's what we try to offer for that weekend, a step back and a step to reflect in a peaceful setting. So important.
Yes.
So you indicate that your practice, and this is a quote, helps autism families and neurodivergent individuals live more peaceful lives. How does it do that?
What a great question. So back, like I was saying, when my son was diagnosed, I had 0 coping skills. So I did not know what to do when this was thrown into my lap. It was confusing. There wasn't a lot of people that I could reach out to in 2001. It took a long time to get the diagnosis. All of that was so taxing on me and my husband at the time, that I just wanted to create something that I didn't have. So the peaceful part came from actually a fridge magnet that I saw one time that said, peace does not mean to be in a place where there's no noise, trouble, or hard work. It means to be in the midst of those things and still be calm in your heart. Mm-hmm. And that was a concept that rang true for me as far as what I wanted. It was my goal, but I didn't know how to get there. So I had to go on my own therapeutic journey after I had my second child. So I had Benjamin in 1997 and then Rebecca in 1999. And at that time, we didn't talk about it like we do now. It was very much pathologized. And so even though all that was going on, I could see kind of under the hood as a family, we needed some structure as far as like, what is this going to look like for us on a day-to-day basis? Mm-hmm. I mean, my son was barely speaking. He's right now can speak, but we can't have a lot of conversations. So we do a combination of speaking and typing. He's an artist as well, so he can communicate through art. He memorizes scripts and music, and so we pull from all of those things. At the time, it was really difficult because all I knew, I was a special education teacher, by the way. So all I knew was what I was taught about autism.
Mm-hmm.
In the I don't know, late 80s, early 90s when I was in college, it was not the autism we know now.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a devastating blow with the thought of, oh my gosh, like, do I save for college or do I save for a group home?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just went head first into, I have to fix this, you know. Um, I don't know how to cope with it. So my goal was, well, I'll just keep working until it's not there anymore, you know. So I had that curative um, lens on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that at that time, there was a lot of talk about vaccines. There was a lot of talk about preservatives. There's a lot of talk about, all kinds of things that could be impacting our kids. And it was a really confusing time with not a lot of research.
Mm-hmm.
So that peacefulness for me was the goal, in creating the practice.
That's so important. What you said about peace isn't the absence of messiness or chaos. It's a willful calm. And that's a really important distinction because that is something we can control.
Mm-hmm.
My wife being a life coach, she has her own podcast called Calm AF. And it's really that sometimes it almost feels like you're white knuckling your way into the calm, but if you're prioritizing it, you can find it. I think that's really important for families to remember because it can feel very overwhelming.
Mm. And
Yeah.
Dave, your point about trying to get some control and taking action as opposed to feeling like it's out of your control and the world is raining down on you and not in a positive way at all. That Janeen, you just shared the notion of that uncertainty, which should I be looking for a group home? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? If you could expand a little bit more on what you said, that you were a mom who, and actually in some information you sent me ahead of time, you said you went from a mom who broke the bank to try to cure my son. And the journey to get to where you are now. I'm sure a lot of our listeners, especially family members and parents, are at different points of that journey right now. So obviously there's no magic kind of formula or prescription, but you have the ability both as a professional and as a parent to reflect on that process. So if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I kind of looking back, think about it in this way. In order to cope, I couldn't accept the cards I had been dealt, right? And it was, since I had a toddler at the time, it was really more about me than it was about him, right? Which I hate to admit that, but I'm just like, this is not what I signed up for, and I know a lot of parents are like, wait, this was not the plan. And so I didn't know how to like lean into a problem or sit with a negative feeling. I mean, I was in my mid-20s when I had my kids. And at the time you think that, you think you know what you need to know until you don't. So,
well, you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. Exactly. So, I kind of use a bomb analogy. I kind of felt like, if you've ever seen like in war movies, if a bomb goes into like a body of water and it explodes and then all of the dust settles and all the stuff that's floating on the top has to be, is the debris that has to be cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that. I felt like, okay, all of the stuff, all of the coping tools that were not ideal, the way that I would handle stress, my crippling perfectionism, all of those things were floating on the top of the water. And I had to either deal with them or they were going to deal with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that started kind of my therapeutic journey. This was before I was a therapist. And then I just started, working on myself. My marriage was in trouble. And, I tell parents all the time, the autism doesn't cause the problems in your
Mm-hmm.
life. It's just a stressor, just like
Mm-hmm.
anything else, just like a cancer diagnosis or the loss of a job or anything else. It's the stressor, it's that bomb that makes you have to look at the stuff that's keeping you from moving forward. So that's kind of how I saw it. But at that time, because of certainty, right? You said before, uncertainty was,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a great word for how I felt at that time. It was crippling uncertainty. And so, in order to grasp some certainty in that situation, I gravitated toward what was being talked about at that time. I saw my son lose skills. And when I started talking to some doctors about it that were in the field of more of functional medicine, the DAN movement, Defeat Autism Now, that was all going on. So I started going to conferences wanting to get some answers.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in that situation, my heart goes out to parents that just feel like they have to know why this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Why did this happen? How did this happen? Could I have avoided it? How do we avoid this with my other children? All of those things are questions parents always have. And my answer to them is usually, let's work on you first. Let's work on, there's a grief process that happens
Mm-hmm.
when you have a child with a disability of any kind. And you have to deal with it, or like I said before, it will deal with you. So in the beginning, when I was kind of on this curative journey, I got involved very heavily with the movement. I was at the CDC, with signs, I wouldn't have considered myself an anti-vaxxer. I would consider myself somebody that felt like my child was vaccine injured because I had no other explanation
Mm-hmm.
and felt like I needed some certainty, and that movement was providing me certainty. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted safer vaccination. I wanted, there was more of a nuanced language, I think, then rather than there is now. Now we're so polarized
Oh yeah.
that, it's kind of like you have to pick a side, and there's just no room for that
Mm. You know,
in this.
when you get to the nuanced piece, something that I share sometimes, but I know it is so nuanced, it has to be said in a very careful way. I mean, there is a literature on vaccine injured children,
Yes.
but it's very rare that
Yes.
that occurs, and in no way can explain, this notion of an autism epidemic, which I don't believe is accurate. The term epidemic, I mean,
Yes.
that's has to do with infectious diseases.
Yes.
And we know there are many, many underlying factors associated with people who have a presentation of autism or children who grow up that way. But I think there are so many nuanced issues, as you said, that get lost because of the polarization right now, and especially right now, and the redefinition of autism, or the attempts to redefine autism, is nothing but a tragedy for families,
Right.
and for children and adults who meet an autism diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an especially tough time. I've had some parents contact me who I've known who say, my goodness, they're thrown back into kind of the memories of when they had to search, what did I do wrong? What's going on?
Yes.
And I'm sure you're facing that in your practice and speaking to parents as well.
Oh, yes. Yes, 100%. And, I don't think I think what was interesting though is that there was a thread that was running through my point of view the whole time, which was I knew my son was in there. I knew my son understood
Mm-hmm.
everything I said. I would go to an IEP meeting and they would say, well, he doesn't really know what time it is during the day. He doesn't have a sense of time, or he can't really read. And I would argue and I'd say, no, 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 you don't understand. He's playing GameCube, reading what's on the screen and doing it. but we can't have a conversation. Like something's off, right? He doesn't have the 52 IQ that you guys assessed him at.
Mm-hmm.
You know why? Because those tests are not normed and designed to be used with neurodivergent individuals. So, we're using, we're putting that square peg into a round hole.
Mm-hmm.
During my journey, what I realized as I started listening to autistic voices, when I read Uniquely Human, Barry, and I started really, and I stayed away from books like yours. I stayed away from neurotribes. Because the culty belief system that I was in with these other parents that all thought their kids were vaccine injured was, well, we don't want to look at any other
Mm-hmm.
information. We know what this is. And so we're just going to fight this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still seeing that in a lot of parents. What's really interesting, though, is that once I started working on my mental health, once I started working on my black and white thinking, my OCD tendencies, my perfectionism, my overachieving, I was able to hold two things at the same time.
Mm.
I was able to say, okay, yes, my child has some autoimmune markers that are very disturbing and some things we need to treat. Yes, he regressed after his vaccines, but I also don't know that that's what caused this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was holding all of these things at the same time, which before therapy was very, very uncomfortable for me because I needed the certainty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes
Absolutely.
total sense. And as a parent, so sounds to me like there are two things that I can absolutely relate to. One is as a somebody who's got a mental model of how things should be and things not lining up with that, especially if you are sort of the overachiever, hyperachieving, get everything lined up in a nice grid and check all the boxes properly. That's very unsettling. But the real the the weighty part of this would also be just as a parent. And you say, like, wait, all the literature that I'm reading or have read or videos I've watched is all about the struggle or the things that are going to be challenges. No parent wants their kid to be struggling. That doesn't have anything to do with autism or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get these gloom and doom scenarios, of course, you're going to be thinking like, wait a minute, my child's going to be at a disadvantage. You're telling me we need to fix this. That's a very parental impulse. There's nothing wrong with it. And in fact, I remember, Barry, at the retreat of yours that I attended, a lot of newer parents to the retreat and to the community were saying, like, I know that people are saying that, my child's life is going to be great. They're going to be brilliant. They're going to be who they are. I'm not there yet. I'm still
Mm-hmm.
struggling with the fact that there is this diagnosis. So it's just human nature,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Well, it's cognitive and emotional multitasking, and that's kind of hard to do. And just a little side comment, Dave, I'm so impressed with your multitasking because obviously our listeners can't see this, but Dave is walking through the airport as he participates.
I'm so impressed, Dave. So impressed.
Just
Well, this is
don't fall down the
This is how-
escalator now, Dave.
now that would be good social media clips if I fell down the escalator and got hit by the tram. Well, thank you. I appreciate the compliment, but this is how I've kind of adapted to being back in the corporate world is you can't not have the conversations, and sometimes you're in an airport. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'll be careful.
But, I think Dave and Janeen, you've raised such important points here about that need for certainty and that comfort if things were black and white, if things were, really dichotomous and you could just point to one thing or the other thing, and then being comfortable with more uncertainty and the nuance and the gray areas, and saying, well, that's okay because that's more what reality is in many cases, as we know, because the professional world has not provided certainty. For example, saying to a parent, oh, well, we see your son or daughter now at 3, and this is what they'll be like when they're 7. Or this is what you should plan for when they're 15. we don't know. And I think we need to tell the stories, and I tried to do that, and we all tried to do that, of all of the times that parents say, well, my son or daughter proved them wrong again, um, in terms of so many issues related to quality of life that people thought or predicted would not happen. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So, so to kind of piggyback on that, it, it was your book, Barry, that really where I was like, wait a minute, this feels right to me. This
Mm,
feels like who my kid is. And I'm going to start doing more of these things in treating him like a human being, not just treating quote unquote the autism.
mhm.
um it's such a difficult place to be when that's your child, like you were saying, Dave. But it really, and then once the social media, actually autistic hashtags started going around, I really started learning from those people, and it was just so eye-opening. I love the thing that I'm seeing now. um Nothing about us without us, or something like that they say.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
actually a phrase that came. I always like to say where it came from because people think that's the autism movement. It actually came from the South African disability movement many years ago and has been adopted. But yeah, nothing about us
Oh,
without us.
I love
Certainly.
that. Yeah,
I
I
didn't
love
know that.
that. I really do. And what's interesting too is we went from a family that just kind of was trudging through, because I mean, my son, God bless him, he has such a difficult time just holding his stuff together,
Hmm.
emotionally. And unfortunately, by being in the Dan movement that I was in, I didn't trust psychiatry. I didn't ever take him to a psychiatrist until he was an adult.
Hmm.
And that is something that I've had to work through in my own therapeutic journey, because looking back, there's a lot of guilt. As parents, we have a lot of guilt.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of guilt of, why didn't I do this sooner? Because he's doing so much better now.
Hmm.
And now that he's not, sometimes these kiddos with the co-occurring things that are going on can
Hmm.
just really be suffering. And it's just no fun for a kid to not be able to hold their stuff together.
Hmm. You
Yeah,
know what?
I would agree. As somebody who has blown his stack, I mean, almost an infinite number of times, I can't even count. You never want to be doing it. You never feel good about it. It's just this pressure release valve hasn't been opened in a while, and boom, you get this explosion. It's not something that's fun or willful.
Hmm. So, Janine, within your both personal experience and professional practice,
Mhm.
um, an issue that comes up, and I feel that it's mentioned a lot, the research demonstrates it, and that is co occurring conditions
Yes.
that go along with an autism diagnosis. We could do it, in reverse way with outside of autism, with ADHD and anxiety disorders, and so many co occurring conditions. Um, and so, what are some of the points of awareness that you feel are so important for our listeners to understand? Because sometimes people do not dig into the complexity of a person experiencing challenges related to different conditions. I think we feel like, okay, well, he's got this and he's got that too. Okay, those two labels, as opposed to the complexity of the experience of the individual who might have co-occurring conditions.
Yes, yes. We see a lot of, in our office, we see a lot of anxiety, a lot of anxiety. Um, it's hard sometimes to tease out, is that anxiety part of autism? Is it an anxiety disorder? If they have so often depression, is that, it's hard to kind of to wheeze it out. And parents ask me all the time, where does the one stop and the other begin? Like, where, if
Mm-hmm.
my child is a teenager, where does the teenage stuff stop and the autism begin? And I always say to them, you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to tell you to treat them the same regardless. I'm going to tell you to treat them with more patience, kindness, really, really kind of trying to understand as best you can where they're coming from. So to me, that doesn't really matter. But when you have things like eating disorders, which RFID is a kind of a newer term that involves restrictive eating patterns. I've had individuals on the spectrum that have binge eating disorders because they can't always figure out when they're full, or they are out of tune with how they feel things in their bodies. A lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I started treating post-traumatic stress disorder in the parents when I first became a therapist because of my own experience and my husband's experience. My husband had been suffering from PTSD a few years after my son was diagnosed as a result of my son escaping from the house. And so at the time I was in grad school, and I sent my husband to the supervisor I was working with to have somebody to talk to. And she said, let's get him into EMDR trauma therapy immediately. So when they did, and it worked so quickly, I said, I got to know how to do this. And so I went and got trained in EMDR. And now I do it with autistic people and with their families, because the trauma piece I thought it was bad in the parents. The trauma piece in people that are neurodivergent, that have gone their whole lives being neurodivergent, some of them not even knowing it, that has an impact. Every time they were misunderstood, every time a teacher, punished them for something that they didn't mean to do or didn't know the rules. There's just so many bullying from other children. There's just so many things that can contribute to that. So sometimes it's hard to tell. Is this anxiety, depression? Is it PTSD? Is it, is it just relationship difficulties? OCD is another one, those obsessive compulsive habits sometimes. But these things present a little bit differently in our kids. And sometimes we don't see them for what they are. For example, a panic attack, right? A lot of neurodivergent people have panic attacks, and it's different than a typical panic attack because it's more of a meltdown, or shutdown, because it's a result of overstimulation as opposed to just a result of having an anxiety disorder and not being able to process the anxiety. I think it's probably a little of both, but it's very common that we see, especially teenagers and young adults, with these panic issues that really, once we dig beneath the surface and realize they're autistic, it's not necessarily panic. It's more of meltdown and shutdown. Does that make sense?
It does. And you know what is interesting to me is, and I won't speak for everybody on the planet who is autistic, but so many of us are able to catastrophize as almost like a specialty. So when you are experiencing some sensation in your body that would signal I should panic more, your ability to catastrophize then says, oh, wait a minute, I'm having a stroke, or the food I just ate is going to kill me. How do I get this out of my body? And it spirals upward very, very quickly. I can speak from experience, but also a lot of the individuals that I've spoken with at different events and then just meeting people have shared similar stories where it's like, I just wish I wasn't so good at catastrophizing so efficiently.
Yeah. It can be a superpower in a lot of people.
Yeah. Strange definition of a superpower. Yeah.
Well, and what's so interesting and what I'm so grateful for is that once I made that shift in my lens, I could treat my patients better. I could, then our office started diagnosing adults. And I could also focus on kind of women on the spectrum that tend to fall through the cracks. And so it turns out, and I've asked my daughter if I can share this, and she has given me permission. My daughter, who's 25, was just diagnosed 6 months ago. So I'm like, oh, okay, this explains a lot. But because growing up, she didn't look like her brother. She didn't present like her brother. She was the quote unquote normal one, right? She learned how to mask. And then she got involved in theater and ended up going to New York and studying theater in college. And she's amazing. I mean, I'm not just saying that because I'm her mom, but she's amazing. And now I know
We
why
believe
she's
you.
so amazing. She's so amazing because she can imitate and be whatever
Yes.
you need her to be.
Yes. And
Yes.
and
By the
and
way,
that
right now I am airport guy. You're hitting it right on the head. I'm not this calm and collected in airports, but I'm in a recorded interview. Of course, I'm going to be like, "Oh yeah, it's fine." Go ahead, Barry. Sorry.
well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out for those listeners who are not aware, that's one of the reasons that's given for so many more late diagnoses of women. And out of the dozens of neurodivergent people we've interviewed on our podcast, the majority were late diagnosed women. And one of the reasons is, and I mean this kind of in quotes, but being good at masking, which of course in the long term could have really, really negative mental health impacts if it's something that's imposed upon you, or something that's a knee-jerk reaction because it was a survival skill for so many
Yep.
years.
Yeah, and I've noticed too, with women coworkers, with women to a different extent than male coworkers and things like that, is the frustration of when you're masking all day and you still get it wrong. So you're putting on your brave face, you're doing whatever, and then somebody says, well, you don't need to be so snarky about it. And it's like, well, naturally I wouldn't have been, but I thought I was reading the room right. Apparently I wasn't, and now it's like, great. So I already wasn't doing it right. Now I'm making additional effort and I'm still not doing it right. It's incredibly frustrating. But women have, men get, again, painting with a broad brush, but men generally get, you can look at our political landscape, men get a pass to do whatever they want, essentially. Women get labels assigned to them if they act the way that men act. It's
Oh,
crazy.
that's such a good way of framing it, Dave. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Well, so it's been interesting because when my kids were growing up, they didn't get along very well with my son's kind of emotional ability. He would break her things. They would fight. They would, and it was hard for my daughter to know like what's typical sibling stuff because we
Mm.
only have the two of them and what's the autism. And, so when she left the house to go to college and had these opportunities in New York during COVID, I said, you have to go. You have to go. If I had known she was autistic, I probably wouldn't have said you have to go.
Uh,
So I'm kind of glad I didn't.
mhm.
I'm kind of glad I didn't because she went and did she struggle a little? Uh-huh. But I tell her, the city was the quietest it will probably ever be in history. And, all of our family is from up in New York and New Jersey. So she comes by it honestly. It's in her DNA. But I said, it's almost like the city quieted down for for your ADHD and your sensory issues. Because we did know she had those things going on. So, um, but she did it. She went to up there and got a degree from Circle and Square Theater School
Amazing.
and then crashed and burned
Oh.
and crashed. So she came back to live with us. And now which I was so nervous about because I thought, how is Ben going to react? How is she going to react? How are we going to make this work? My husband had just quit his job teaching for 20 years so that I could go and run the practice full time. And Ben was just refusing to go to school or a day program. He was about 18 or 19 at that time. So we had to just kind of move and shift everything in our family. And then my daughter was coming back home. Well, I have to tell you, and I'm going to say this, trying to say this without getting too teary. This has been the most amazing time in my parenting journey,
Mhm.
hands down, because we've come to a place where my marriage is good. My husband and I have learned how to accept each other. He's ADHD AF, Dave, if that's
Now you're
so
speaking my language.
oh my gosh, is he ADHD? And I often joke, and they don't always appreciate it, that I am the prefrontal cortex for the entire home.
Uh, uh,
So, and they utilize that. So we have a very good sense of humor in the house. We have a very dark sense of humor. And it just keeps us all going. And my kids the other night, they were cooking in the kitchen, just the two of them together. And my daughter was accommodating all of his needs, and he didn't, lash out and smack her when he got mad. It was like these were all huge wins.
Hmm.
And I said to my husband, you know what? I feel like the universe is giving us a little bit of a do-over.
Mm.
And it's been magical,
Mm.
really.
I think you were anticipating the next kind of issue that I did want to raise for discussion. And that is a phrase that I like to use, and that is, at least from my neurotypical distant perspective with 50 years of experience, is that autism and other neurodivergent conditions shape lives. And
Mhm.
you've just shared, in terms of your journey, how it has shaped your lives, but I'm sure you also see that in many people that you support and work with. And I think one of the positive things, and I'm going to ask you to kind of expand upon this, is it's not always shaping lives in unexpected, challenging ways. Certainly not in the ways that our dear Secretary of Health and Human Services has put forth in the last few days, as far
Right.
as destroying and shattering lives. So if you could talk about that balance. I mean, you actually gave a beautiful example with your family.
Yeah, I mean that I think that's the balance. And I feel like, is autism hard? Yeah. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I think it's more so because I don't always know, my son can't always tell me the things that he's feeling, and he
Mm,
can't always express when he's mad other than breaking something. And then I know he's mad. And then we talk about, you know what I mean? It's the impulsivity is hard. There's just so much about it that's hard because it encompasses all aspects of his life.
mhm,
Um, but I feel like there's in any extreme ideology, there's a lack of humility. And we need humility again.
mhm,
We need to be able to say, I don't know what this child needs, but I'm going to find out. I'm going to see if the child can let me know what they need. And I can, read those signals. When my son would kick a hole in the wall, of course, my first go-to was to yell and, what are you doing? Oh my gosh, and, make it worse. I had to learn and practice being calmer in those situations
mhm,
and realizing, okay, this is I getting him to comply, the compliance based beliefs about autism doesn't help
mm,
him manage those emotions better. It just helps him stuff them down.
mhm,
Yep.
So it's just I had to just relearn everything, and part of that is humility.
mm,
Yeah, it's humility, I think, also allows you to look at a situation. So the way my wife describes it is the calmest energy in the room is the one that sort of synchronizes the room. Um, and it can be very deceptive because you would think that somebody blustering in and calling all the shots and speaking the loudest, or whatever, that people are going to synchronize to that energy, and they do, realistically. But if you can manage to keep the calm through that, eventually it's like the experiment where they put 15 different metronomes all clicking at different rates or frequencies, but eventually they all sync up to
Yeah.
one frequency. And if you can be the calmest one in the room, but as a parent, it's very hard because most of us are trying to just get something done to get on to the next thing. And when you're
mhm,
already feeling frantic, or, hey,
mhm.
I just need to get this thing off of my list so I can move on to mowing the yard or whatever before company comes over,
Yeah.
and somebody kicks a hole in the wall, it's like, I didn't budget for that.
Mhm.
you
Right.
know? So
Yeah.
it can be that is the challenge of the parent, is remaining calm, for sure.
Mhm,
Because we were only raised by people who were doing their best, and on and on and on.
mhm.
So
And it's all about, what is referred to these days as co-regulation, or what we refer to in the CERTS model as mutual regulation. And I think it's so important what you said, Janine, that you've learned to really listen deeply, but you have to be that in that state to listen deeply. And what I mean by listen is not necessarily words that a person is saying. Listen to the whole experience that that person is experiencing. And
Yes.
sometimes it's our best educated guess. And that's where the humility comes in. I may not get it right all the time, but I'm trying my best. And we're all trying our best. But you can't really be at your best for trying unless you could really be present with a person and listen and then reflect that state of calm. It may not be calm. Sometimes it could be joining a person in their excitement, in their elation. So it's not always about the calm either. And by the way, I learned that from an autistic friend a number of years ago. They said, listen, I don't want you always to be calm with me. If I'm excited, I want you to get excited with me. I want you to join with me.
Yeah, I love that. And I just think that that speaks to, the whole idea of just honoring the person that's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk in our societies about, wokeness, which has become a term that I can't stand because it's been weaponized,
Mm-hmm.
it just means inclusivity. It means meeting people where they are and
Mm-hmm.
accepting them for who they are and understanding that we're not any better.
Mm-hmm.
We're all just trying to figure out life. We're all just trying to figure it out. And so if we can be kinder and gentler to each other, if we can be respectful of how that person sees the world and their experience, we're just all going to be better off. But we can't do that without that humility. If we're leaning into that certainty, that changes the whole dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and a great example of that, weirdly enough, here I am in Cincinnati's airport, and you can see on my camera here, I'm standing directly in front of a sensory space.
It's
All
Now,
amazing.
right.
that's not just for kids, that's for kids and adults. That's inclusivity. And if that's woke, then, I guess call me guilty because I think it's a fantastic idea.
Yes.
Yes.
And like it doesn't, it there's no harm in integrating and making things accessible and a better experience for people. There's no harm in it whatsoever. And it's so easy to do. Sensory space. They just put a sign up and,
Yes.
they protect the room. It's wonderful.
That's
I had
amazing.
seen that in the Portland, Oregon airport, but this is the second instance that I've seen. And
Hmm.
it's so true. I mean,
Yep.
certain people will say, oh, that's not woke stuff. You got to be kind and gentle for all people with differences. And yet, I want to be there right now.
Of course,
I
Well,
want to be,
the people who rail the most against woke should probably spend some time in a sensory space and just chill out for a second and get over themselves.
yeah, like
But
their whole life in a sensory space. Anyway,
exactly. I mean, that we could talk about the pathology of people that think that way, but we're not going to go there today.
that's so true. So, any other points you'd like to leave our listeners with? I mean, you made so many important points about your personal journey, and that translates into what you see working with people that you support professionally.
Mhm.
But I think your journey is a journey that I see so many families have taken, and some families still struggling and not there yet.
Yeah.
But what do you say to our listeners from your personal and professional experience?
Well, there's no we made it in autism parenting. Just
Hmm.
from the parent's perspective, it's not like, oh, yay, look at us. Because you're always ready for the next thing, and there's always going to be a next thing. But
Hmm.
rather than having the point of view of, okay, we got here, now let's stay here. I feel like if you can have more of a flexible point of view, that things are going to change.
Hmm.
We have to accept where we are in order to change it. Acceptance doesn't mean we stay stuck.
Hmm.
Accepting where your child is doesn't mean you don't want them to grow.
Hmm.
So I think I would just end with autism does not ruin things. It doesn't ruin marriages. It doesn't ruin households. It doesn't ruin children. Our response to the stress
Hmm.
is what makes the difference in the outcome.
100% agree with that. It is our notions and our reactions and our responses that are the problem. And if we turn the camera inward, we will see that.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Which does take us to the next step. And I'll quote a dad from our parent retreat a few years ago. And that quote is, "We've learned to keep away from the doom and gloom crowd. We've learned to surround ourselves with people who could be in the present and accept the good, but also acknowledge and be able to deal with some of the challenges as well."
I love that.
Yeah. Thank you, Janeen. It's been a pleasure. I knew it would be. And it's so special when we have people who could kind of integrate their professional experience with their personal experience. It's I think a special learning experience for me. So much appreciated.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Thank you for joining us. This was amazing. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So Dave, now go catch your flight.
I'm going to. I'm actually catching a pepperoni pizza, and then I'm going to get on my flight.
Sounds good.
In the sensory space.
All righty. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Janeen.
Are you looking for a new job or want a career change? Look no further than Monster.com. Need a little help standing out? Our expert resume writing services will make sure you shine. Want to brush up on your interview skills? Engage with our AI interview prep tool. Want some advice on negotiating your new salary? Visit our salary tools and extensive library of career advice articles, and you'll have all the tips and tricks you'll need to succeed. Visit Monster.com today and take the first step towards your career. Monster.com. Find your right job fit.